Hey guys, tonight we are going to sit with one of the most heartbreaking, unsolved cases in New England. The story of a bright 16-year-old girl who went to her summer lifeguarding job on an ordinary June morning and simply vanished from the empty beach where she was supposed to be. Her name was Molly Bish, and she was a beloved daughter and sister from the small town of Warren, Massachusetts. On the morning of June 27th, 2000, her mother dropped her at the pond where she worked, and within minutes Molly was gone, leaving behind only her belongings on the sand. It would be nearly 3 years before the world learned what had become of her, and to this day, no one has ever been held to account. Before we settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you find real value in what we do here. There is no pressure and no guilt. Thank you, truly, for the case suggestions that keep finding their way to us. We are also now on Spotify, so the link is in the description if you would rather listen there while you drift off tonight. Now dim the lights and get comfortable. This is a long one, and Molly's story deserves to be told slowly and carefully, and with the greatest gentleness, because Molly was a child, a 16-year-old girl, and we are going to treat her story with the dignity that a child victim demands. We will not dwell on anything painful or graphic. We will not sensationalize. We are going to keep Molly herself, the bright and kind young girl she was, at the very center of everything, and we are going to hold her family, who have carried this loss for a quarter of a century and turned it into a mission to protect other children, with all the respect they have earned. This is a story of profound loss, and also of profound love, and we will tell it as such. Have you ever wondered how a young girl can vanish from an open, public place, a town beach on a summer morning, in the few minutes between being dropped off and starting her shift, without a single soul seeing what happened? That is the terrible mystery at the heart of Molly Bish's case. She was there, and then she was not, and all that remained was the small evidence of her ordinary morning, laid out on the sand where she had left it. To understand how that could happen, and to honor the girl at the center of it, we have to begin with who Molly was, and with the loving family and small town she came from. Molly Ann Bish was born in the summer of 1983, and she grew up in Warren, Massachusetts, a small town in the central part of the state, in a close and loving family. Her parents, John and Magi Bish, had moved to Warren when Molly was very small, and there they raised their children, Molly and her older sister, Heather, and her brother, John Jr. By every account, Molly was a wonderful girl, warm and bright and full of life, athletic and pretty and kind, the kind of teenager who was easy to love and easy to be proud of. She was close with her family, close with her sister especially, and she was growing into a lovely young woman with a whole life opening in front of her. She was, in short, a much-loved child in a happy family, an ordinary girl living an ordinary good life in a small New England town. Let's stay a little longer with who Molly was, because she deserves to be seen as a whole person and not merely as the victim of a famous crime. Those who knew Molly describe a girl who was genuinely good, kind to others, close to her family, the sort of teenager parents hope their children will grow into. She was athletic and healthy, active and capable, a strong swimmer and a responsible young person, which is exactly why she had been entrusted with the serious job of lifeguarding. She had the ordinary dreams and energy of a 16-year-old at the threshold of the rest of her life. The friendships, the interests, the sense of a future opening outward. She was a real girl, specific and irreplaceable, with a laugh her family still remembers and a presence that filled their home. And every word we say about her case is underneath, about her, the person, and the enormity of what was taken. It matters especially in a case like this to hold on to the child rather than the crime, because the danger with any famous case is that the person disappears into the mystery, becomes a name attached to a puzzle, a face on a poster, a case number in a cold case file. Molly was none of those things first. She was a daughter and a sister and a friend, a bright girl who loved her family and was loved by them, a young lifeguard proud of her summer job. When her family remembers her, and when we tell her story, it is that girl we are trying to honor, the living Molly, not the manner of her death. And it is for that girl, and for the family who love her still, that the search for the truth goes on. There is a particular cruelty in the loss of a child, and it is worth naming gently. When a young person is taken, the world loses not only who they were, but everything they would have become, all the years and the growth and the ordinary joys that lay ahead. Molly would be a grown woman now, likely with a life and perhaps a family of her own, the 16-year-old lifeguard long behind her. All of that was stolen, the whole unlived life of a good young person, and the theft of it is part of what makes these cases so hard to bear. We grieve not only the girl who was lost, but the woman she never got to be, and every year that passes is another year of a life that should have been lived and was not. Have you ever wondered how a whole future can be erased in a matter of minutes? How everything a young person might have been can be taken in the space between a goodbye and a shift that never started? That is the scale of what happened to Molly Bish and to her family. In the few minutes it took for a mother to drive away from a town beach, a 16-year-old girl, and every year she had left were taken from the world. The size of that loss is almost impossible to hold in the mind, and it is why a case like Molly's stays with people, why a whole state search for her, why her family has spent 25 years seeking answers. It is not only that a crime was committed, it is that a child and a whole life were lost. At 16, Molly was doing the things that healthy, happy teenagers do. She had friends, she played sports, she was athletic and capable, a strong swimmer, which is part of how she came to the job that would place her, tragically, at the pond that summer. She had earned a position as a lifeguard, a job of real responsibility and a mark of her competence and maturity, watching over the swimmers at the town beach through the warm months. It was, for a 16-year-old, a good and grown-up summer job, the kind that a capable young person takes pride in, and Molly had it. She was a young lifeguard at the start of a summer, doing exactly what a responsible, athletic teenager should be doing, and there was no reason in the world to think that her summer job would become the setting of a tragedy. There is a painful poignancy in the fact that Molly was a lifeguard, and it deserves a gentle word. A lifeguard is a protector, a young person entrusted with the safety of others, trained to watch over swimmers and to pull them from danger. Molly had taken on that role, had earned that trust, had become one of the people whose job it is to keep others safe. And in one of the cruelest ironies of her story, this young protector, this guardian of others' safety, was herself the one who could not be protected, taken from the very post where she watched over everyone else. There's something almost unbearably sad in that. The guardian who was not guarded, the young lifeguard who kept others safe and could not, in the end, be kept safe herself. It speaks too to the kind of young person Molly was, that she had chosen and earned such a role. To be a lifeguard at 16 is to be responsible, capable, and trusted. A young person mature enough to hold the safety of others in her hands. That was Molly, a girl serious and skilled enough to be given real responsibility, the kind of teenager a community relies on. To be fair, her competence and responsibility did nothing to protect her from what happened, because no amount of maturity can defend a person against someone who seizes an unguarded moment. But it tells us who she was, a good and capable young person, a protector, and it deepens the tragedy that such a girl, of all people, should have been the one taken from that beach. Have you ever wondered how the cruelest tragedies so often fall on the most undeserving, how the good and the responsible and the kind are not spared by their goodness? Molly's case is a hard example of that. She did everything right. She was responsible, capable, trusted, a lifeguard at her post on an ordinary morning, and none of it protected her, because the danger that found her had nothing to do with anything she did or failed to do. That is one of the hardest truths these cases teach, that tragedy is not deserved, that being good does not make a person safe, that the fault lies always and only with the one who does the harm. Molly was a good girl, doing a good thing, and what happened to her was in no way hers to prevent or to deserve. Let's talk about the place, because the setting of this case is a small and ordinary one, which is part of what makes the tragedy so hard to comprehend. Comins Pond is a modest body of water in Warren, a town beach where local families came to swim in the summer, the kind of small, safe, familiar place that anchors the summers of a small town. It was not a wilderness or a dangerous or remote spot. It was a community beach, watched over by teenage lifeguards, visited by parents and children, a place woven into the ordinary rhythm of a New England summer. That such a place could become the site of a child's disappearance is part of the deep unease of Molly's case, the reminder that danger can intrude even into the safest and most ordinary corners of our lives. You're in Warren, Massachusetts, in the last days of June in 2000, and it is the beginning of a small town summer. School is out. The days are long and warm. Families are heading to Comins Pond to swim, and the teenage lifeguards are taking up their posts for another season. It is a scene of complete ordinariness, the kind of gentle small-town summer that most of us carry some version of in our memories. Into this ordinary summer, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 16-year-old Molly Bish sets out for another day of watching over the swimmers at the pond. There is nothing to mark the day as different from any other, and it becomes the day that shattered a family and a town and opened a wound that has never closed. But before we come to that morning, we have to talk about the day before, June 26th, because of a detail that would haunt Molly's mother for the rest of her life. On that day, Molly Bish, Molly's mother, had also been at the pond, and she had noticed something that troubled her. In the parking area near the pond, she saw a man sitting in a white car. He was a heavy-set white man, she would later say, somewhere in middle age, perhaps 45 to 55, with dark and greying hair, and he was smoking, sitting in his parked white car near the beach where the young lifeguards worked. Something about him registered as out of place, as vaguely wrong. the way a watchful parent's instinct sometimes picks up on a thing it cannot quite name. But nothing happened that day, and the man in the white car was just a man in a car, and the moment passed, as such moments almost always do, into nothing. You're in that parking lot on the day before, seeing what Maggie saw, and it is one of those small moments whose weight only becomes clear in hindsight. A white car parked near a town beach, a middle-aged man inside, smoking, watching, or perhaps just sitting. The way people sit in parked cars for 1,000 innocent reasons. A mother's instinct pricking faintly, registering something not quite right, and then letting it go, because there was no reason to do otherwise, because parked cars and idle men are part of the ordinary furniture of the world. It was nothing that day, and it would become, in the terrible clarity of what came after, perhaps the most important thing Molly Bish ever saw. A warning she could not have known was a warning, glimpsed and released the day before her daughter vanished. We have to be very careful here, and gentle with Maggie, because the burden of that moment is almost unbearable, and it must never be turned into blame. A parent cannot act on every faint unease, cannot keep a teenager home from a summer job because of a stranger in a parked car, cannot live in a state of constant alarm against dangers that almost never materialize. Maggie did nothing wrong. She saw a man in a car, as any of us might, and had no way to know what the next day would bring. The guilt that a parent carries in a case like this, the endless replaying of the moment, the terrible if only, is one of the cruelest weights these tragedies impose, and it is a weight that Molly Bish did not deserve and should never have had to bear. She was a loving mother who saw something ordinary and let it pass, as any of us would have, and the fault lies entirely with whoever harmed her daughter and with no one else. Have you ever wondered how a completely ordinary moment, a glimpse of a stranger in a parked car, can become, in the light of a later horror, a thing that haunts a person for the rest of their life? That is what the white car became for Molly Bish. In the aftermath, that glimpse took on an enormous and painful significance, both as a possible clue and as a source of a mother's endless, undeserved anguish. Was the man in the white car connected to what happened to Molly? Investigators would come to take the sighting seriously, and the white car would become one of the central threads of the case. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. On the evening of June 26th, none of that was known. There was only a mother's faint unease, already fading, and a daughter with a summer shift to work in the morning. The morning of June 27th began as ordinarily as any summer morning, and we can trace it almost minute by minute, which makes the ending all the more incomprehensible. Molly got ready for her day at the pond, and her mother, Maggie, drove her there, as she did. On the way, by the accounts given, they made small, ordinary stops, the little errands of a summer morning, pausing briefly, even, near the local police station so Molly could pick up the radio that lifeguards carried. These are the tiny, mundane details of a normal day, the kind no one thinks twice about, the kind that become unbearably precious when they turn out to be the last. At about 9:58 in the morning, Maggie dropped Molly at the parking area by Comins Pond, and Molly got out to begin her shift, and her mother drove away. That was the last time Molly Bish saw her daughter. Think about that ordinary goodbye, the kind that happens millions of times a day between parents and children, a mother dropping a teenager at a summer job, a quick farewell, a drive away, with the easy assumption that there will be a pickup that afternoon and a dinner that evening and 1,000 more ordinary days to come. Maggie had no way to know that this goodbye was the final one, that the daughter stepping out of the car into the summer morning was stepping out of her life forever. None of us, saying such ordinary goodbyes, ever imagines it might be the last. That is part of the particular horror of a case like Molly's, the way it transforms the most ordinary of moments, a mother dropping her daughter at work, into the last thread of a life about to be severed. We tend to imagine that a final goodbye should carry some weight, some warning, some sense of occasion. In reality, the last goodbyes in cases like Molly's are almost always utterly ordinary, indistinguishable from the 1,000 goodbyes that came before. There was no special embrace, no premonition, no sense that this parting was different from any other morning drop-off. It was just an ordinary goodbye between a mother and her teenage daughter at the start of a summer day, exactly like the ones before it, and everyone assumed exactly like the ones that would follow. And that is precisely what makes it so heartbreaking, that the last time Magi saw Molly was not marked by anything at all, was just a normal moment in a normal morning, given its terrible weight only by everything that came after. There is a quiet lesson in that, one that these cases press on all of us, though it is a hard one to hold. We never know which ordinary goodbye might be the last. That is not a reason to live in fear, which would be its own kind of loss, but perhaps it is a gentle reminder to hold the ordinary moments a little more dearly, to not let the routine goodbyes pass entirely without love, because the routine is precious in ways we usually only understand in hindsight. Molly's mother did not know that morning's goodbye was the last, and could not have known, and there is no fault in that. But her story quietly reminds the rest of us to cherish the ordinary partings, the everyday goodbyes, because they are, every one of them, a gift we are not guaranteed to receive again. You're in that ordinary morning moment, watching a mother and daughter say a routine goodbye that neither knows is the last, and it is almost too tender to bear. There is no drama in it, no sign, nothing to distinguish it from any other morning, and that is exactly why it breaks the heart, because it is so ordinary, so much like all the goodbyes each of us has said and taken for granted. Molly stepped out of the car into the summer morning, and her mother drove away, and it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and it was the end of everything. To hold that image gently, without dwelling on the horror but honoring the tenderness, is part of what it means to tell Molly's story with the care it deserves. What happened in the minutes after Maggie drove away is the heart of the mystery, because it happened with terrible speed and left almost no trace. At about 10:03 in the morning, only a few minutes after Molly was dropped off, a local resident came to the beach and found Molly's things laid out where a lifeguard would leave them. There was her first aid kit. There was her backpack, her chair, her sandals, the radio she had just picked up, her whistle, her water bottle, her lunch, all the small equipment of a teenage lifeguard settling in for a day's work. Everything was there, arranged as if Molly had arrived and begun to set up for her shift. Everything was there except Molly. In the few minutes between her mother's departure and that discovery, Molly Bish had vanished from the beach, leaving her belongings behind, and no one had seen a thing. The speed of it is one of the most striking and revealing aspects of the case, and it tells us something, even if it does not tell us enough. Only about 5 minutes separated the moment Maggie dropped Molly off from the moment the belongings were found without her. 5 minutes. In that tiny window, on an open public beach in daylight, Molly went from a healthy 16-year-old settling in for a shift to simply gone. Whatever happened, it happened fast, and it happened without a witness, which suggests something about how it unfolded. It suggests a person who moved quickly and decisively, who was perhaps already there, waiting, who seized a narrow moment of opportunity when Molly was briefly alone at the start of her shift before other people arrived at the beach. To be fair, we cannot reconstruct the specifics because there were no witnesses, but the sheer speed of it points to something planned or opportunistic and swift, not a chance encounter that escalated slowly, and that speed is part of what has always made the case so frightening. That narrow window also speaks to a particular vulnerability that is worth naming gently. Molly arrived at the beach early before the day's swimmers, alone at her post in those first minutes of her shift. A lifeguard is, by the nature of the job, often the first person at the water and sometimes, briefly, the only one, arriving to set up before the public comes. In that ordinary circumstance lay a hidden danger. A young person alone in a public but momentarily empty place, and it was into exactly that narrow gap that the tragedy fell. It is not a failing of Molly's, or of anyone's. It is simply the cruel way that danger can find the smallest opening, the few unwatched minutes at the start of an ordinary day, and turn them into catastrophe. Whoever took Molly found that opening and used it, and was gone before the world noticed she was missing. Have you ever wondered how a person can be surrounded by the safety of an ordinary day, a public beach, a summer morning, a town full of people, and still be reached by danger in a gap of only a few minutes? Molly's case is a stark and painful lesson in exactly that. She was not in a remote or obviously dangerous place. She was at a town beach, in daylight, doing a responsible job. And still, in a 5-minute window, she was taken. That is a truth that unsettles all our assumptions about safety. The reminder that danger does not always announce itself, that it can find even the most ordinary and protected of moments if the opening is there. It is one of the reasons Molly's case has stayed with so many people, because it happened not in the shadows, but in the bright, ordinary daylight of a summer morning. You're in the bright morning on that empty beach on June 27th, and it is a scene of quiet, ordinary wrongness. The pond is calm, the summer sun is climbing, and there, at the lifeguard spot, is all of Molly's equipment, her chair and her kit and her whistle, laid out and waiting, as if she had just stepped away for a moment and would be right back. But she is not right back. The beach is empty of the girl who should be there. Her lunch is waiting for a lunch break that will never come. Her whistle is silent. It is one of the most haunting images in any missing persons case. The empty lifeguard's post, all the small signs of a young life interrupted mid-motion. The girl herself simply gone from the middle of an ordinary morning. At first, the belongings on the beach did not necessarily mean disaster. Perhaps Molly had stepped away. Perhaps there was some ordinary explanation. But as the morning went on and Molly did not appear, the ordinary explanations ran out. She did not report for duty. She was not answering. By about 11:44 in the morning, her supervisor, alarmed that a responsible young lifeguard had simply not shown up for her shift and could not be found, call the police. And with that call, the ordinary summer morning tipped over into the beginning of a nightmare, as the people of Warren began to grasp the impossible fact that 16-year-old Molly Bish had disappeared from the town beach in broad daylight, and no one knew where she had gone. What followed was one of the largest search efforts the state had ever seen. When a child goes missing, the response is immediate and enormous, and it was so for Molly. Police, volunteers, and specialists poured into Warren and the surrounding countryside. Over the days and weeks, the search grew to involve more than 200 people, covering something on the order of 7 square miles of ponds and woods and fields. There were helicopters overhead and dogs on the ground, divers and sonar searching the water of the pond itself, searchers on horseback moving through the countryside. It became, by many accounts, the largest missing person search in the history of Massachusetts, a vast and desperate effort to find a 16-year-old girl who had vanished from a town beach. The whole community and much of the state mobilized around the hope of bringing Molly home. You're in Warren in the days after Molly vanished, and the small town has become the center of a massive and frantic search. There are search teams fanning out through the woods. There are volunteers walking lines through fields, divers going into the pond, dogs working the trails. There are Molly's face on flyers in every window, and the terrible, hopeful energy of a community throwing everything it has into finding one of its own children. And at the center of it are John and Magi Bish and their family, living every parent's worst nightmare, waiting for word, praying for their daughter's safe return, as the search widened day by day and the answers refused to come. The effort was enormous, and it was heartfelt, and for a very long time it found nothing at all. There's something both moving and heartbreaking about the scale of that search, and it is worth sitting with. When a child goes missing, a community discovers what it is made of, and Warren and the surrounding towns discovered that they were made of people who would drop everything and walk the woods for days to find one of their own. Strangers gave up their time, and neighbors organized, and specialists came from across the state to help. For a while, finding Molly became the single most important thing in that corner of Massachusetts, an outpouring of collective effort and love aimed at one 16-year-old girl. That is the beautiful side of a tragedy like this, the way it reveals the goodness and solidarity of ordinary people, the way a whole community can rise up around a single lost child. And yet, all of that effort, all that love and labor and determination, could not find Molly. And there is a particular grief in that too. The searchers walked the fields and dragged the pond and combed the woods. And Molly was not where they looked, because she had been taken miles away, to a place the initial searchers did not reach. The enormous effort came back empty, day after day, and the family and the community had to absorb the slow, crushing realization that even this, even the largest search in the state's history, was not enough to bring Molly home. To be fair, the searchers did everything right, and the failure was not theirs. It was simply the cruel reality that Molly had been carried beyond the reach of even a massive and heartfelt search, and that finding her would take not effort alone but time and chance and the passage of nearly 3 years. You're among the searchers in those long days, walking a line through the summer woods, calling Molly's name, scanning the ground, holding on to the hope of finding her alive with each step. It is exhausting, emotional, desperate work undertaken by people who mostly did not know Molly personally, but who could not bear the thought of a child lost and unfound. And every evening, the search would end for the day without an answer, and everyone would go home carrying the weight of it. And in the morning, they would come back and do it again. That is what a community did for Molly Bish, and though it did not find her, it stands as a testament to how much a lost child matters, and to the goodness of the ordinary people who would not stop looking. As the search unfolded, investigators returned to the detail that Maggie had seen the day before, the man in the white car, and it became a central focus of the case. Working with Maggie, the authorities brought in a renowned forensic sketch artist, a woman named Jean Boylan, known for her careful and sensitive interview methods, to develop a composite image of the man Maggie had seen. The resulting sketch of a heavyset middle-aged man became one of the defining images of the case, circulated widely in the hope that someone would recognize him. The white car, seen near the pond both the day before and, by some accounts, on the morning itself, became one of the most important threads investigators had to pull. It was, for a long time, the closest thing the case had to a lead toward a specific person. We should be careful and fair about that sketch and that car, because a composite image is a starting point, not a conviction. A sketch made from a brief glimpse, however skilled the artist, is an impression, not a photograph, and many innocent men resemble any given composite. The white car and its occupant became the focus of enormous investigative effort, precisely because they were the most concrete lead available. But a lead is not a solution, and over the many years since, that thread has never been definitively tied to a specific, charged individual. We raise it because it was central to the investigation, and we hold it as what it is, a genuine and important clue that has never resolved into an answer, and not as an accusation against any particular person who happened to resemble a sketch or own a white car. It is worth understanding a little about how composite sketches work and about their real strengths and limits, because the sketch has been so central to Molly's case. A forensic artist like Jean Boylan, who worked on Molly's case and is among the most respected in the field, does something more subtle than simply drawing what a witness describes. The best practitioners use careful, patient interview techniques designed to draw out a witness's genuine memory while avoiding the traps that can distort it. The way a witness can unconsciously borrow features from photographs they have seen or firm up hazy impressions into false certainties under the pressure of questioning. A sketch made this way can be a remarkably useful tool, capturing the essence of a face well enough that someone who knows the person might recognize them. But even the finest composite is an impression, not a photograph, and it is important to hold that truth alongside the sketch's usefulness. A face glimpsed briefly from a distance, on an ordinary day when the witness had no reason to study it, is not recorded in the mind with photographic accuracy. Memory does not work that way. It captures an impression, a general sense, a few salient features, and the sketch, however skilled, can only render that impression, not a precise likeness. This means that a composite can genuinely help identify the right person, and it also means that many innocent people may resemble any given sketch, and that resemblance to a composite is not, by itself, evidence of guilt. To be fair, that is not a criticism of the sketch or the artist. It is simply the nature of the tool. powerful and limited at once, and it is why a composite is a lead to be followed, not a verdict to be pronounced. The white car carries a similar double character, as both a genuine lead and a limited one. That Magi saw a man in a white car near the pond the day before, and that a white car was reportedly seen there again, is a real and potentially important detail, exactly the kind of thing investigators must pursue. But white cars are common, and a car near a public beach in summer is an ordinary sight, and the presence of a white car is not, by itself, proof of anything. The investigators were right to take the sighting seriously and to pursue it hard, because it was among the most concrete leads the case offered, and we are right, at the same time, to hold it carefully as a genuine clue that has never been tied conclusively to a specific charged person, rather than as an accusation against everyone who drove a white car through central Massachusetts in the summer of 2000. And then, for nearly 3 years, there was the waiting, the long and agonizing suspension of not knowing, which is its own particular torment. The search for Molly did not immediately find her, and as the days became weeks, and the weeks became months, and the months became years, the Bish family lived in the terrible open space of a missing child. They did not know whether Molly was alive or dead. They did not know whether she was being held somewhere, or whether she had come to harm, or whether she might, against all hope, still come home. Every knock at the door, every ring of the phone, every new development carried the unbearable, double possibility of the best news or the worst. To be fair, as the years passed, hope grew harder to sustain, and yet a parent cannot simply stop hoping for a missing child. And so the Bish family lived suspended between hope and dread for nearly 3 long years. You're in that suspended time with the Bish family, and it is a country of exhausting, unresolved grief. There is no funeral, because there is no certainty. There is no homecoming, because there is no Molly. There is only the open question, renewed every single morning, of where their daughter is and what has become of her. The family had to go on living somehow, through birthdays and holidays and the ordinary passage of time, all of it shadowed by the absence of Molly and the silence where an answer should be. It is a form of endurance that most of us are fortunate never to have to learn, and the Bish family lived it day after day for almost 3 years, holding on to a hope that grew thinner with each passing season. Psychologists have a name for the particular grief the Bish family lived in during those years, and it is worth knowing. They call it ambiguous loss, the grief of a person who is gone but not confirmed gone, absent in body but unresolved in fact. It is, by many accounts, one of the hardest kinds of loss a human being can endure, because it denies the mind the terrible mercy of certainty. A family in ambiguous loss cannot fully mourn, because mourning feels like a betrayal of hope. They cannot fully hope, because hope feels like a denial of reason. So they are caught, suspended between the two, unable to move fully in either direction, for as long as the not knowing lasts. For the Bish family, that suspension lasted nearly 3 years, and it was its own distinct ordeal, layered on top of the loss itself. The days still had to be lived, of course, and that is one of the cruelties of a long disappearance. The world does not stop. There were still meals to make, still the other children to care for, still the ordinary business of being alive. All of it carried on beneath the crushing weight of Molly's absence and the silence where an answer should be. Birthdays came, including Molly's own, and had to be somehow endured. Holidays came with their empty place at the table. The family had to find a way to keep functioning, to keep the rest of their lives going, while a piece of their hearts was missing and unaccounted for. That they did so, that they survived those years at all, is a quiet testament to the endurance that love makes possible even in the face of the unbearable. You're inside those 3 years with the Bish family, and you can feel how the not knowing seeped into everything. Every phone call might be the call. Every knock at the door might bring news, good or terrible. The family lived in a state of permanent, exhausting readiness for word that took years to come, a vigilance that could not be switched off, and underneath it all ran the two impossible hopes, the hope that Molly was somehow alive and would come home, and the quieter, darker hope that if she was gone, they would at least be able to find her and bring her to rest. When the answer finally came, it was the second hope that was granted, not the first, and even that was a kind of mercy after the long agony of knowing nothing at all. The answer, when it finally came in the way these things sometimes do, by chance and in stages, and we are going to describe it gently, because Molly was a child and she deserves that gentleness. In November of 2002, more than 2 years after Molly vanished, a hunter in the woods on a hill in the town of Palmer, some 5 miles from Comins Pond, came upon an item of clothing, a bathing suit, that would prove to be Molly's. That discovery led investigators to the area, and in the following June, in 2003, after careful searching, they recovered remains that were identified through DNA and dental records as Molly Bish. After nearly 3 years, the long and desperate search had, at last, found her, not alive, as everyone had prayed, but at rest in a quiet wooded place miles from where she had disappeared. We will not dwell on the painful details of that discovery, out of respect for Molly and for her family, and there is no need to. What matters is the human truth of it, that after nearly 3 years of not knowing, the Bish family finally learned that their daughter was gone and were able, at last, to bring her home and to lay her to rest. That is a terrible mercy, the mercy of an answer that ends the not knowing while confirming the worst. The family could finally grieve with certainty, could hold a funeral, could have a grave to visit. It is worth pausing on what that meant, because it is a strange and painful kind of gift. For nearly 3 years, the family had nowhere to put their grief. There was no grave and no certainty, and no place to put the grief. There was only the open question. Finding Molly did not answer who took her, and it did not ease the sorrow of losing her. But it did give the family something they had been denied. It gave them their daughter back, in the only way left, so that they could bring her home. They could lay her to rest in a real place. They could visit her. They could grieve her as a daughter who was gone, rather than as a question that would not close. That is the quiet mercy hidden inside the worst news. To find a missing loved one, even to find that they are gone, is to end one particular torment, the torment of not knowing, of imagining, of being unable to grieve or to rest. It does not lessen the loss. In some ways it deepens it, replacing the faint thread of hope with the solid weight of certainty. But it gives the grieving a place to stand. The Bish family, after 3 years suspended in the unknown, could finally stand on the hard ground of the truth, could finally mourn Molly fully, could finally bring her home to a resting place they could tend. It was a terrible mercy, but it was a mercy, and it is one that many families in these cases never receive. You're with the family in that moment of terrible mercy, when the long not knowing finally ends and the grief can, at last, take its full and settled shape. It is not relief, exactly, because the news is the worst news, but it is an ending to one kind of suffering, the suffering of the open question, and it lets a different and more bearable kind of grief begin. The family could finally do the things that grief needs, could gather, could mourn, could lay Molly to rest. After 3 years in the cruel country of the unknown, they were allowed, at last, to grieve their daughter on solid ground, and Molly, after 3 years lost, was finally brought home to the people who loved her. It was the end of one agony, the agony of not knowing, and the deepening of another, the certainty of the loss. And it transformed the case, formally, from a disappearance into what it had long been feared to be, a homicide. With the discovery of Molly's remains, her death was ruled a homicide, though the passage of time meant that the specific cause of death could not be determined. What was clear was the terrible fact at the center of the case that Molly Bish had been taken from that beach and killed by someone, that a 16-year-old girl had been the victim of a crime, and that whoever was responsible had never been caught. The mystery was no longer whether something terrible had happened to Molly. That was now tragically certain. The mystery was who had done it, and why, and how a person could take a child from a public beach in broad daylight and vanish so completely that a quarter of a century of investigation has never named them in a courtroom. Molly's disappearance and death left a lasting mark on Warren and on the wider region, the kind of wound that a small town carries for generations. In a small community, everyone is connected, and the loss of a child touches everyone. Molly was not a stranger to the people of Warren. She was a local girl, a familiar face, one of the town's own children. Her loss shattered the sense of safety that a small town depends on, the comfortable assumption that in a place this small and this close, everyone is looked after and nothing truly terrible can happen. After Molly, that assumption was gone. Parents held their children closer. The town beach, once a place of simple summer joy, carried a shadow. A community that had thought itself safe learned, in the hardest way, that it was not. Over the years, the town has held Molly in its memory, refusing to let her be forgotten. There have been memorials and remembrances, gestures of a community that lost one of its own and would not let her slip from its heart. The pond, the town, the whole landscape of Molly's short life carry her memory now, a presence woven into the place. To be fair, a small town's grief can also be a heavy thing, a wound that is reopened with each anniversary, each renewed round of news coverage, each false hope of a break in the case. But the town has carried it alongside the family for 25 years, keeping Molly's memory alive as a way of insisting that she mattered, that her loss was not just a tragedy, but the tragedy of a specific, beloved, local child. You're in the town of Warren in the years after Molly's death, and the ordinary summer life of the place goes on. The children swimming at the pond, the seasons turning, and yet there is a thread of memory running through it all. The people who were there remember. The name Molly Bish carries weight in that town, a mixture of grief and love and the enduring wish for justice. Her story became part of the identity of the place, a sorrow the community shares, a girl the town has refused to forget. That collective memory is its own kind of monument, the way a small town holds on to its lost child, keeping her present in the shared heart of the place long after the world's attention has moved on. It is worth asking why Molly's case has resonated so far beyond Warren, why it has held the attention of a whole region and beyond for 25 years, because the answer touches something deep in all of us. Part of it is the sheer ordinariness of the setting, a town beach, a summer morning, a teenager at a wholesome summer job, which makes the horror feel close and possible rather than distant and rare. Part of it is the haunting image of the empty lifeguard post, the belongings laid out and waiting, the girl simply gone. But the largest part, for most people, is that Molly's case touches the deepest fear a parent can have, the fear of a child taken, of a goodbye that turns out to be the last, of the ordinary safety of daily life failing at the one moment it mattered most. Every parent who hears Molly's story feels a version of that fear, because every parent has dropped a child somewhere, at a job, at a practice, at a friend's house, with the easy assumption of seeing them again. Molly's case whispers the terrible possibility that lives inside every one of those ordinary goodbyes, the possibility that it might be the last. That is a frightening thing to sit with, and it is part of why the case has stayed with so many people, because it speaks directly to the love and the fear that parents carry. To be fair, the actual likelihood of such a tragedy is very small, and the world is far safer than a steady diet of these stories would suggest. But the fear is real, and Molly's case gives it a name and a face, and that is part of why it has never let go of the public heart. There is a way to let that fear do some good, and Molly's own family showed it. The response to the fear a case like this evokes is not paralysis or panic, but the sensible, loving vigilance that the Bish family turned into their foundation's work, the teaching of safety, the readiness of information, the simple attentiveness that helps keep children safe without ruling their lives with fear, which is to say that Molly's story, for all the fear it stirs, also carries a gift, the reminder to cherish the ordinary goodbyes, to look out for our children and for one another, and to build the kind of awareness that might someday spare another family the loss the Bish family endured. In that way, even the fear the case evokes can be turned, as the family turned it, toward protection and care. Now, we come to the question of the people who have been looked at over the years, and we are going to handle it with the same care and fairness we bring to every such question, and with particular firmness here, because this is an unsolved homicide, and no one has ever been charged. Over the 2.5 decades since Molly disappeared, investigators have examined a number of individuals as possible persons of interest, people whose histories, or resemblance to the Composite Sketch, or connection to the area or to a white car, drew the attention of the case. Some of these individuals had troubling histories of their own. Some resembled the sketch. Some have since died. But here is the fact that must anchor everything we say. Not one of them has ever been charged in Molly's death. Not one has been shown in a court of law to be responsible. Every one of them is, in the eyes of the law, an innocent person. We are not going to name these individuals or walk through their histories, and we are going to explain why, because the reasoning matters. In an unsolved case, the list of people who have been looked at is not a list of the guilty. It is a list of people who, for one reason or another, drew investigative attention and were never charged, either because they were cleared or because the evidence was insufficient. or because they died before any case could be brought. To parade those names, to rehearse their histories, to invite an audience to decide for themselves which one did it, is to do exactly the kind of harm this channel refuses to do. It treats uncharged people as guilty. It substitutes suspicion for evidence. And in a case where the real answer has never been established, it risks staining innocent people or the memories of dead ones with a crime that has never been proven against them. So we will say only this: investigators have worked hard, have examined many possibilities, and have not yet found the evidence to charge anyone, which is to say the case is genuinely unsolved. And the honest response to that is patience and fairness, not the naming of names. This restraint matters more than ever in the age of the internet, where an unsolved case becomes a puzzle for the whole world to solve, and where the naming and accusing of the uncharged has become disturbingly casual. Molly's case, like every famous cold case, has attracted enormous online attention, and with it, endless speculation about who was responsible. Names get attached, theories get built, and individuals who were never charged, some of them long dead and unable to defend themselves, get tried and convicted in comment sections and videos by people who are not there and have no evidence. That is a real harm, and it is one this channel refuses to add to. When strangers decide, on no proof, that a particular person committed a murder, they can damage real lives and defame the dead, and they do it in the name of a justice that actual justice would never recognize. We hold, instead, to a simple principle. A person who has not been charged is, in the eyes of the law and in the account we give, innocent. That principle protects all of us, and it protects especially the many people who fall under suspicion in a high-profile case without ever being shown to have done anything wrong. To be fair, the impulse to name a culprit is understandable, born of a genuine desire for justice for Molly and an inability to bear an unsolved crime. But justice for Molly will not come from an internet mob deciding who is guilty. It will come, if it comes, from evidence, from the patient work of investigators, and from the courts. And until that day, the fair and the decent thing is to refuse to accuse the uncharged, and to let the pursuit of the real answer proceed without staining the innocent. Have you ever wondered how the hunger for an answer, however well-meaning, can curdle into a kind of injustice of its own? The conviction of the uncharged in the court of public opinion. A case like Molly's is a standing temptation to exactly that, because the not knowing is so painful that almost any culprit feels better than none. But an innocent person wrongly accused is a second victim, and a rumor treated as a fact is its own kind of harm. So we resist the temptation. We can say that many people have been looked at. We can say that none has been charged. And we can refuse, firmly, to turn suspicion into a verdict because Molly deserves the real truth, and the real truth is not served by convicting the innocent to satisfy our own need for an ending. What has kept the case alive, and what offers real hope, is the steady advance of forensic science and the refusal of investigators and Molly's family to let the case go cold. Over the years, the evidence in Molly's case has been tested and retested as the technology has improved. Investigators have sent material to specialized laboratories, have pursued enhanced DNA analysis, and have turned to the newer methods of forensic genetic genealogy, the same family of techniques that has, in recent years, cracked open cold cases that had sat unsolved for decades. The hope is that somewhere in the preserved evidence there is genetic material that could, with the right analysis and the right comparison, finally point to the person responsible. A substantial reward has stood for information leading to an arrest. The case has not been abandoned. It has been worked patiently and persistently for 25 years, and it is still being worked today. There is real reason for hope in that, because the last 2 decades have transformed what is possible in old cases. Crimes that seem permanently unsolvable have been broken open by genetic genealogy, in which a tiny sample of preserved DNA is compared against the vast genetic databases that people build researching their family trees, allowing investigators to trace a suspect through their relatives. Old evidence, carefully kept, has suddenly become able to speak. To be fair, there is no guarantee that Molly's case holds the right kind of evidence or that the analysis will succeed, but the combination of preserved material, advancing science, and a determined investigation is precisely the combination that has solved other cold cases once thought hopeless. And it is the strongest reason to believe that Molly's case, too, might one day be answered. The rise of forensic genetic genealogy, in particular, has changed the landscape for cases like Molly's in ways that were unimaginable when she disappeared in 2000. In this approach, a genetic sample recovered from evidence is compared not against the limited databases of known offenders, but against the enormous and growing databases created by ordinary people researching their ancestry. Because we share DNA with our relatives, even a distant match, a second or third cousin who submitted their genetic information to a genealogy service, can give investigators a thread to follow, allowing them to build out a family tree and narrow toward a specific person. This technique has, in recent years, solved cases that had been cold for 30, 40, even 50 years, putting names to crimes that everyone had assumed would never be answered. It has become one of the most powerful tools in the history of cold case investigation. For Molly's case, that means there is a genuine, science-based reason for hope, provided the preserved evidence contains usable genetic material. Investigators have pursued exactly these methods, sending evidence for enhanced testing and genealogical analysis, working with the specialized laboratories that perform this painstaking work. To be fair, the technique is not magic, and it has real limits. It requires a usable sample, and it requires that the responsible person or enough of their relatives be findable in the genetic databases. Not every case has the right evidence, and not every effort succeeds. But the mere fact that these tools now exist and are being applied to Molly's case means that a case which sat unsolved for decades is not necessarily unsolvable, and that the answer, preserved in a sample and waiting for the science to catch up, may still come. Which is to say that Molly's case sits in a hopeful moment, at the intersection of preserved evidence, advancing science, and a determined investigation that has never given up. The evidence has been kept, and the methods keep improving, and the investigators keep working the case. And somewhere in that combination lies the real possibility that the person who took Molly could still be identified, even after all these years, even if they are no longer living, so that the Bish family could finally have the answer and the accountability they have sought for a quarter of a century. It is not a certainty, but it is a real and grounded hope, and it is more than many cold cases can claim, and it is part of why Molly's case, though old, is not closed. But the most extraordinary thing to come out of this tragedy is not forensic. It is human. And it is the response of Molly's family, who took the worst thing that can happen to a family and turned it into a mission to protect other children. John and Magi Bish and their family created the Molly Bish Foundation, an organization devoted to child safety. Rather than let their grief consume them, they poured it into work that might spare other families their pain, teaching child safety, promoting awareness, and creating identification records for children, so that if the worst ever happened to another family, the tools to help find their child would be ready. Through the foundation, the Bish family has helped photograph, fingerprint, and create safety identification for tens of thousands of children. Out of the loss of one child, they built something to protect countless others. You're in the presence of that kind of transformed grief now, and it is one of the most moving things a family can do. The Bish family had every reason to close in on their sorrow, to let the loss of Molly define and diminish the rest of their lives. Instead, they faced outward, toward other people's children, toward the prevention of other families' tragedies, turning their private catastrophe into a public good. That is not the natural motion of grief, which tends to curl inward around the wound. It is a deliberate, sustained act of love and will, carried out in Molly's name for a quarter of a century. And it means that Molly's memory is attached not only to a terrible, unsolved crime, but to the protection and safety of a great many other children, a legacy of care built on the foundation of an unbearable loss. The work of the Molly Bish Foundation deserves to be understood in its fullness, because it is one of the truly redemptive things to come out of this story. In the wake of Molly's disappearance, her family recognized a hard truth, that when a child goes missing, the first hours are precious, and that having up-to-date photographs, identifying information, and safety knowledge ready in advance can make an enormous difference. So they built programs to provide exactly that, holding events where children could be photographed and fingerprinted and given identification records for their families to keep, teaching children and parents about safety, spreading awareness about how to prevent abductions and how to respond if the worst happens. Through this work, they reached tens of thousands of children, arming families with tools that Molly's own case had shown to be vital. Think about what that means and what it cost. Every child the foundation helped protect was a reminder of the child the family could not protect. Every safety event was, in a sense, a memorial to Molly, an attempt to spare other families the agony the Bish family lived. To turn the worst loss imaginable into a mission to shield other people's children is an act of almost unimaginable grace, a decision to answer a private catastrophe with public good. To be fair, no amount of good works could ever fill the hole left by Molly, and the family would trade every bit of it in an instant to have her back. But given a loss they could not undo, they chose to make it mean something, to let Molly's memory become a force for protecting other children. And that choice is one of the most moving things in this whole sad story. You're watching a family transform the unbearable into the useful, and it reframes what strength and love can look like in the face of horror. The Bish family had every reason to be destroyed by what happened, to disappear into their grief and never emerge. Instead, they built something in Molly's name that has protected countless other children and comforted countless other families. That is not the natural response to such a loss. It is a chosen, deliberate, sustained act of love, carried out over decades in honor of a daughter who was taken. And it means that Molly Bish, whose life was cut short at 16, has, through her family's devotion, gone on protecting children she never met, a legacy of safety and care that is her own quiet, enduring monument. 25 years after Molly vanished, the case remains open and actively investigated, and the authorities have continued to say that they want to solve it, that they have not given up. Each anniversary brings renewed attention, renewed appeals, and in recent years, renewed hope from the advancing science. The investigators have made clear that they truly want to bring the case to a resolution, to give the Bish family the answer they have sought for a quarter of a century, and to hold accountable whoever took Molly from that beach. An open case is a case that can still be solved, and Molly's is open, worked, and genuinely capable, even now, of yielding an answer. To be fair, 25 years is a very long time, and the passing years make any case harder. But the case is not closed, and Molly is not forgotten. And the question of who harmed her remains, in principle, answerable. The investigators who have worked Molly's case over the years deserve a word, because their persistence is part of why hope endures. A case does not stay active for 25 years by itself. It stays active because people refuse to let it die. Detectives have carried Molly's file across decades, some of them inheriting it from those who came before, all of them determined to be the ones who finally solve it. They have followed the leads, submitted the evidence for each new round of testing, kept faith with a family that trusts them to keep trying. That kind of long dedication to a case that has resisted every effort is its own quiet form of devotion. It is the professional cousin of the family's love, the refusal of the people whose job it is to seek justice to give up on a girl they never met. There is something moving in that, in the idea of investigators who never knew Molly working for decades to find who took her. They do it because it is their job, yes, but they also do it because a murdered child demands an answer, because some cases get under the skin of the people who work them, because the thought of Molly's killer never being caught is one they cannot accept. Over the years, they have spoken publicly about their determination to solve the case, their belief that it can be solved, their commitment to the Bish family. That determination matters. It means Molly's case has not been filed away and forgotten. It means people are still trying, still testing, still hoping, still working to give a family the answer they have waited a quarter of a century to receive. You're looking at the whole long effort now, the family and the investigators and the advancing science, all of it bent toward a single goal, the truth of what happened to Molly Bish. It has taken 25 years, and it has not yet succeeded, and still no one has given up. The family keeps Molly's memory alive, and the investigators keep working the case, and the science keeps improving with every passing year. And somewhere at the meeting point of all that persistence lies the real possibility that the answer will finally come, that the person who took Molly will finally be named, that the family will finally have justice. It has not happened yet, but it is not impossible. And the fact that so many people, for so long, have refused to give up is itself a kind of faith that the truth is out there, waiting, and that one day it will be found, which is to say that the thing this case most needs is what it has always needed, a single person deciding to speak, or a single piece of evidence finally finding its match. Somewhere, it is entirely possible. There is a person who knows something about what happened to Molly Bish on that June morning in 2000, something they have carried for 25 years, whether out of fear or guilt or a mistaken belief that after all this time it no longer matters. It matters. Cases like Molly's are often broken in the end, not by science alone, but by a human being who finally sets down a secret they can no longer carry, or by the quiet mathematics of a DNA match that suddenly gives a name to a decades-old crime. Either of those could still happen in Molly's case. Neither has happened yet, but the case is alive, and the possibility is real. That places a certain responsibility on all of us who take an interest in a case like Molly's, and it is worth naming plainly. Public attention can be a genuine force for good in an unsolved case, keeping it visible, jogging memories, reaching the one person who holds a missing piece, sustaining the pressure that keeps investigators and resources engaged. The very fact that Molly's name is still spoken, still searched, still remembered, is part of what keeps her case alive and its answer possible. But that same attention carries a responsibility to be careful and to be kind, to keep the interest pointed at finding the truth and away from harming the innocent, whether that means the uncharged people who have fallen under suspicion, or the dignity of Molly herself and her grieving family. Have you ever wondered whether the cases that stay with us are the ones that most need us to keep watching? The ones where our collective attention is not idle curiosity, but a kind of long vigil kept on behalf of someone who can no longer keep it for themselves. Molly's may be one of those. For 25 years, a great many strangers have kept her story alive alongside her family, and that shared attention, kept respectful and kept kind, is part of what still gives the case a chance. Every time her name is spoken with care, every time the facts are told fairly and gently, the odds tick up, however slightly, that the story will reach the one person who can finally answer it. Remembering Molly, honestly and with respect, is not a passive act. It is part of the search itself. The healthy version of that attention is easy to describe, even if it is not always easy to practice. Keep Molly's memory alive. Share accurate information. Point anyone with real knowledge toward the authorities and the reward. But refuse to accuse the uncharged. Refuse to sensationalize a child's death. Refuse to turn a family's tragedy into cheap entertainment at the expense of their dignity or the memory of a good young girl. That is how a case is kept alive without doing harm, and it is the only way worthy of Molly, who deserves to be remembered and sought with the same care and love with which her family has always held her. If you are listening tonight and you know anything at all about what happened to Molly Bish, anything you saw or heard or were told in the years since that June morning in 2000, please contact the Massachusetts State Police or the District Attorney's Office for the Worcester area. Even a small detail, a memory that has stayed with you, could be the thread that finally brings Molly's family the answer and the justice they have sought for 25 years. Please verify the current tip lines and the reward before relying on them, because such details change over time. But do not assume that what you know is too small or too old to matter. In a case this patient, this preserved, this fiercely kept alive by a loving family, the smallest piece of truth could be the one that finally closes it. It is worth pausing to consider what an answer would mean for the Bish family after all these years, because it is not a simple thing, and it is different now than it once was. In the earliest years, the great unanswered question was whether Molly was alive, and an answer would have meant either the joy of a homecoming or the grief of a confirmed death. That question, tragically, was answered when Molly was found, and the family was able to bring her home and lay her to rest. But a second question remains, and it is the one that still hangs over the family, the question of who did this and whether they will ever be held to account. An answer to that question would not bring Molly back. It would, however, bring something the family has sought for 25 years, the truth of what happened and the accountability that justice demands. There is a particular weight to an unsolved murder that a solved one does not carry, and it is worth naming with compassion. When a crime is solved, a family can at least know what happened and see some measure of justice done. When it remains unsolved, the family is denied both, left not only with their grief, but with the added burden of knowing that the person responsible has never answered for it, may still be out there, may have lived a full life while their child lay in the ground. To be fair, justice cannot undo the loss, and no verdict could ever balance the scale of a murdered child. But it can offer something, the knowledge of the truth, the accountability of the guilty, the sense that the world has not simply let the crime stand. That is what the Bish family still seeks, and what an answer even now, even after 25 years, could still provide. Which is to say that the case is not only about the past, but about a justice still owed to Molly and to her family, a debt that remains unpaid. Somewhere, the truth of who took Molly exists, in a memory or in a genetic sample or in a fact not yet uncovered. And the whole long effort, the family's endurance, the investigators' persistence, the advancing science is aimed at collecting that debt at last, at bringing the truth into the light and the guilty to account. It has not happened yet, but it remains possible, and the family has never stopped believing it, and their belief is not foolishness, but a reasonable hope grounded in a case that is still genuinely alive. We should return before we close to Molly's mother, Magi, and to the particular weight she has carried, because her endurance is one of the quiet heroisms of this story, and because it deserves to be honored rightly. Magi was the last person in the family to see Molly, the one who dropped her at the pond that morning, the one who had seen the man in the white car the day before. Any parent in her position would be tormented by those facts, would replay them endlessly, would be tempted to blame themselves for what no parent could have foreseen or prevented. That is a cruel and undeserved burden, and it is one that Magi, by every account, has had to live with alongside her grief. And yet she did not let it destroy her. She became, with her husband and family, a tireless advocate, turning her pain outward into the protection of other children, refusing to let guilt she did not deserve have the last word. Let us say it as plainly as we can, for Magi and for every parent who has ever carried such a weight. She did nothing wrong. She saw a man in a parked car, as any of us might, and had no way to know what the next day would bring. She dropped her daughter at a summer job, as parents do millions of times a day, with every reasonable expectation of a safe return. The fault for what happened lies entirely and solely with the person who took Molly, and with no one else, and certainly not with the mother who loved her and did everything a loving parent does. The guilt that these tragedies press onto surviving parents is one of their cruelest and most unjust effects. And if there is anything we can offer Maggie across the distance, it is the simple, true reminder that she was a good mother to whom a terrible thing was done, and that the blame is not, and never was, hers to carry. You're in the presence of a mother's strength now, the strength it takes to lose a child to a crime that was never solved, to carry an undeserved burden of if only, and still to stand up year after year to speak your daughter's name and to work to protect other people's children. That is a kind of courage most of us will never be called upon to show, and Molly Bish and her whole family have shown it for 25 years. Their endurance, their advocacy, their refusal to let Molly be forgotten or to let their own grief harden into despair is the human heart of this story, and it is a testament to a love that not even the worst of losses could defeat. The loss, of course, was not the parents alone, and it is worth remembering the wider circle of those who loved Molly and have carried her absence through the years. Molly had a sister, Heather, and a brother, John Jr., and the loss of a sibling in such a way leaves its own deep and lasting mark. To lose a sister to a crime that was never solved, to grow older while she stays forever 16, to carry the particular grief of a sibling gone too soon, is a burden that Molly's brother and sister have had to bear alongside their parents. Heather, in particular, has been part of keeping Molly's memory alive over the years, one of the voices that has refused to let her sister be forgotten. The whole family absorbed the loss, each in their own way, and each has carried Molly forward through the decades since. Beyond the family, there were Molly's friends, the other teenagers who knew and loved her, who had to grow up and grow older without her, who learned far too young that the world can take a friend in the space of an ordinary morning. There were the people of Warren, the neighbors and teachers and townsfolk who knew Molly as a local girl. A death like this sends its grief outward through a whole web of relationships, touching everyone who knew the person and many who did not. All of them, in their different ways, absorbed a piece of the loss, and all of them, in their different ways, have carried Molly's memory. A young life, however brief, touches more people than we usually count, and Molly's touched many, and the grief of her loss was, and remains, widely shared. You're among all those who loved Molly now, the family and the friends and the town, and you can feel how a single loss ripples outward through so many hearts. There is her mother and father, her sister and brother, her friends, her town, each carrying their own version of the same grief, the same unanswered question, the same enduring love. That is the true scale of a loss like Molly's, not a single wound, but a whole constellation of them, spreading through everyone whose life she touched. And it is that whole community of the grieving, bound together by love for one girl, that has kept Molly's memory alive for 25 years, and that still waits, together, for the answer that would let them all, at last, find some peace. Because in all the talk of searches and sketches and science, it is essential that we keep the bright young girl at the center, and not the crime that took her. Molly Bish was 16 years old, a warm, athletic, kind, and much-loved daughter and sister from a small town in Massachusetts. She was a lifeguard, entrusted with the safety of others, a responsible and capable young person at the start of a summer and the start of a life. She had a family who adored her, a sister she was close to, a whole future opening in front of her. She was not a headline or a case file or a cautionary tale. She was a child, a real and specific girl, loved beyond measure, and she should have had every one of the decades that were stolen from her. Remember Molly tonight not for the terrible way her story ended, but for the bright young life it was, and for the love that has carried her memory for 25 years. Remember the family who lost her and who turned their grief into the protection of other children, a response of such grace that it ought to humble anyone. And remember that behind this and every cold case is a real person who was loved, and a family still waiting for the answer that would let them rest. Molly Bish was here. She mattered, and she matters still, and her family has never stopped loving her or seeking justice for her. Somewhere, the truth of what happened to her still exists, waiting for the day it is finally known. Until that day, we keep her name in the light, spoken with care. Rest easy, Molly, and may the justice your family has sought for so long finally, at last, come home.